The text message from my ex-wife came on a Tuesday afternoon as I sat in my temporary office reviewing acquisition documents. "David, I hate to ask this, but is there any chance we could talk? It's important." I stared at the message for a long time. It had been nearly 3 years since Alexandra had walked out of our modest suburban home and into the waiting BMW of my former friend, Marcus Reed. 3 years since she'd told me with practiced sympathy in her voice that she deserved to be happy and that our 8-year marriage had run its course. I set my phone down without responding and turned back to the stack of papers before me. Tomorrow I would be announced as the new CEO of Meridian Financial Partners, a mid-sized investment firm that had recently gone through a turbulent restructuring. The same firm where Alexandra had worked as Director of Client Relations for the past 5 years. The same firm where, according to my sources, she was now fighting for her job after Marcus had lost everything in a series of disastrous investments. What she didn't know, what no one at Meridian knew except the board of directors, was that the private equity group that had acquired the struggling company last month was mine. And tomorrow, every employee would learn that their new boss was the man Alexandra had deemed too ordinary and not ambitious enough before leaving him for someone with a bigger house and faster car. I'm David Chin, 42 years old. And this isn't a story about revenge. It's about something more complicated. About falling, climbing back up, and discovering who you really are along the way. I met Alexandra Barnes in 2014 at a friend's gallery opening in Chicago. I was finishing my MBA while working full-time at a small consulting firm, living in a studio apartment, and driving a 10-year-old Honda. She was stunning, tall, poised, with a sharp intelligence that came through in every conversation. On our third date, she told me she had a 5-year plan that included a director-level position, a house in the right neighborhood, and eventually, a family with the right partner. "I know exactly where I'm going," she said, eyes bright with ambition. "I just need to find someone who's headed in the same direction." I thought I was that person. We were married a year later. For the first 5 years, we seemed to be building the life Alexandra had envisioned. I moved from consulting to a stable position with a financial services firm. We bought a house in a good neighborhood, not the best, but with potential. Alexandra climbed steadily through the ranks at Meridian Financial, impressing everyone with her poise, her connections, and her ability to bring in wealthy clients. Looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming. Alexandra would compare our life to those of her colleagues and clients, people with vacation homes, private school connections, memberships to the right clubs. I would remind her that we were doing well, that we were building something sustainable. "But we could be doing better," she'd say. "You could be doing better, David. You're smart enough. Sometimes I think you just don't want it badly enough." Marcus Reed entered our lives in 2019. He was a client at my firm, new money from a tech startup acquisition, looking for investment advice. We became friends to the extent that someone like Marcus has friends. He collected people who could be useful to him, who could reflect back the image he wanted to project. When he learned my wife worked at Meridian, he was eager to meet her. "Meridian's exclusive," he said. "I've been trying to get in there for months. Their minimum investment threshold is serious." I introduced them at a dinner party we hosted. I still remember how Marcus looked at Alexandra, assessing her like an asset. And I remember how she looked back, seeing opportunity. Within 6 months, Marcus had moved his considerable portfolio to Meridian with Alexandra as his dedicated advisor. They began having lunch meetings, then dinner meetings. I told myself it was professional. Alexandra told me the same. "He's the biggest client I've ever landed, David. Do you know what this means for my career?" For us. But it wasn't about us. It never had been. The day Alexandra left, she packed methodically, taking exactly what was hers, leaving exactly what was mine. She'd prepared a document outlining how we should divide our assets. Her attorney had already drawn up divorce papers. "Marcus and I connected in a way I didn't think was possible," she explained, her voice calm, rehearsed. "I tried to make this work, David, but we want different things. You're content with this?" She gestured around her home. "I want more." I remember standing in our living room, surrounded by the life we'd built, feeling as though the floor had dropped away beneath me. "Did you ever love me?" I asked. "Or was I just part of your 5-year plan?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said. It was all I could manage. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Alexandra didn't ask for alimony. Marcus's wealth made that unnecessary, but she took half of our savings and her share of the house's equity. I sold the house soon after. Couldn't stand to live in rooms that echoed with her absence and betrayal. That first year after the divorce was dark. I moved to a small apartment, went to work, came home, and tried to remember who I was before Alexandra. Friends invited me out, tried to set me up on dates, but I wasn't ready. Instead, I poured myself into work during the day, and at night, I began researching an idea that had been forming in the back of my mind for years. In my consulting days, I'd worked with several private equity firms. I'd seen how they identified struggling companies with untapped potential, acquired them, restructured, and either sold them for profit or maintained them for long-term growth. I'd always thought I could do it better, with more emphasis on building value through investing in people and culture, not just cutting costs. Now I had nothing to lose by trying. I reached out to former colleagues, pitched my vision for a different kind of private equity group. Most weren't interested, but a few were intrigued enough to listen. Among them was Elaine Woodson, a brilliant investment strategist who'd been passed over for promotion too many times at her male-dominated firm. "Your idea has merit, David," she said after reviewing my business plan. "But you'll need capital and connections, neither of which you have in abundance right now." She was right, of course. But something had changed in me since Alexandra left. The need to prove myself, to her, to Marcus, to the world, was like a physical force driving me forward. "I'll find investors who believe in the long-term vision," I told Elaine. "People who want more than a quick return." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "If you do, I'm in." It took 6 months of relentless networking, pitch meetings, and rejections before I found my first serious investor. A retired tech entrepreneur named James Liu, who had worked his way up from nothing and built his company on principles similar to what I was proposing. Most of these vulture capitalists, they swoop in, strip companies bare, and leave the workers with nothing, James said during our third meeting. "You're talking about building something sustainable. That's rarer than you think." With James's initial funding and endorsement, others followed. By the end of that first year post-divorce, Chen Partners was real, small, but operational. Elaine came on board as chief investment strategist. We assembled a team of analysts and began looking for our first acquisition opportunity. I heard about Alexandra and Marcus through mutual friends. They'd bought a mansion in the exclusive North Shore area. They were fixtures at charity galas and social events. Marcus had started his own investment fund, leveraging Alexandra's connections from Meridian to attract clients. They were, by all appearances, living the life Alexandra had always wanted. I deleted my social media accounts to avoid seeing their carefully curated photos. I focused on building my company, on proving that my approach to business, patient, ethical, focused on long-term value, could succeed in an industry known for its ruthlessness. Our first acquisition was a small manufacturing company in Wisconsin, struggling after being mismanaged by a large conglomerate. We restructured it, invested in modernizing equipment, retained the experienced workforce instead of outsourcing, and within 18 months, it was profitable again. We didn't sell it. Instead, we maintained ownership while giving the local management team significant autonomy and performance incentives. The success of that first venture brought more investors, more capital. Chen Partners grew. We acquired 3 more companies over the next year, applying the same philosophy. Not all went perfectly, but our track record was strong enough to attract serious attention in the private equity world. Then, in December 2023, I received a call from a contact at Goldman Sachs. "There's a situation you might be interested in," she said. "Meridian Financial Partners is in play. They've had some significant losses, their stock is undervalued, and word is they're looking for a buyer before things get worse." My heart stuttered at the mention of Meridian. "What kind of losses?" "One of their senior partners made some extremely risky bets in emerging markets that went south. They're also dealing with a client exodus after some compliance issues came to light." I knew without asking that the senior partner was likely Marcus Reed. After leaving me, he'd continued climbing the ranks at Meridian through a combination of Alexandra's connections and his own aggressive investment strategies. "Send me the details," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We'll take a look." That night, I sat in my downtown apartment, much nicer than my post-divorce place, but still nowhere near as ostentatious as what Alexandra and Marcus had acquired, and considered the crossroads before me. Acquiring Meridian would be the largest deal Chen Partners had ever undertaken. It would stretch our resources and test our business model. From a purely financial perspective, there were valid reasons to pursue it. The company had a strong client base despite recent troubles, an excellent location, and a generally skilled workforce. With better management and an infusion of capital, it could thrive again. But there were also Alexandra and Marcus to consider. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the divorce. I had no idea if they knew about my success with Chen Partners. I'd kept a deliberately low profile, focusing on results rather than publicity. If we acquired Meridian, I would inevitably have to face them both. I called Elaine. "I need your objective assessment," I said after explaining the situation. Can we strip away the personal elements and determine if this acquisition makes sense for us? Elaine, bless her, didn't ask about my history with Meridian's director of client relations. She simply said, I'll have a preliminary analysis on your desk tomorrow morning. Her assessment was thorough, dispassionate, and ultimately positive. Meridian aligned with our investment strategy. Their troubles were significant but not terminal. With the right leadership and restructuring, the company could be turned around. A week later, I convened our investment committee and presented the opportunity. After extensive discussion and due diligence, we decided to move forward. The negotiations were complex and tense. Meridian's leadership knew their position was weak, but they still fought for the best terms possible. Throughout the process, I remained anonymous, working through intermediaries. It wasn't unusual in deals of this nature for the acquiring entity to maintain privacy until things were finalized. Only Meridian's board knew that Chin Partners was the buyer, and they had no reason to connect that name to Alexandra's ex-husband. In February 2024, the deal was completed. Meridian Financial Partners became a Chin Partners company. As part of the acquisition agreement, the board would remain in place for a transitional period, but the CEO who had presided over the company's decline would step down immediately. Chin Partners would install interim leadership until a permanent CEO could be appointed. That interim CEO would be me. The night before the announcement, I received another text from Alexandra. David, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. This time, I responded, what do you need, Alexandra? Her reply came quickly, could we meet for coffee? I'm in a difficult situation and could use some advice from someone I trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. After leaving me for my wealthy friend, after telling me I lacked ambition and vision, she now wanted advice from someone she trusted. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her face whatever difficult situation she was in alone. But another part, the part that had once loved her, the part that had built a company partly to prove her wrong, was curious. I'm busy tomorrow, I wrote. Maybe later in the week. Thank you, she replied. Thursday lunch? The cafe near your old office? I almost laughed at her assumption that I was still at my old job. I'll let you know, I responded and left it at that. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian's offices an hour before the all-staff meeting scheduled to announce the acquisition and introduce the new leadership. The board members were already there, along with Elaine and our CFO, Michael Torres. We gathered in the conference room to review the transition plan one final time. The staff is nervous, Patricia Winters, the board chair, informed us. There have been rumors about layoffs since word of the acquisition leaked. We'll address those concerns directly, I assured her. As we've discussed, our focus is on rebuilding, not downsizing. We need the experienced staff to accomplish that. At 9:30, employees began filing into the large presentation room. From my position in the side office, I could see them through the one-way glass, groups of concerned-looking professionals speculating about their futures. I spotted Alexandra immediately. Even from a distance, she looked different from the confident woman who had left me. Her posture was tense, her expression strained as she spoke with a colleague. At precisely 10 o'clock, Patricia stepped to the podium to begin the meeting. I listened as she explained the acquisition in broad terms, emphasizing that Chin Partners had a track record of successful turnarounds and building long-term value, not stripping companies and selling off assets. And now, she said, I'd like to introduce the founder and CEO of Chin Partners, who will be serving as Meridian's interim CEO during this transition period. Many of you may not be familiar with his work as he's maintained a relatively low profile despite his firm's success. Please welcome David Chin. I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and walked onto the stage. The room was silent as I approached the podium. I allowed myself one glance in Alexandra's direction. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with shock. Next to her, Marcus Reed looked as though he'd been struck. Good. Thank you, Patricia, I began, addressing the room with a calm I didn't entirely feel. I know transitions like this create uncertainty, and many of you are wondering what this means for your future at Meridian. Let me be clear, Chin Partners believes in building companies, not dismantling them. We invest in people and culture, not just balance sheets. As I outlined our vision for Meridian's future, the areas that needed strengthening, the assets we would build upon, the timeline for stabilization and growth, I could feel Alexandra's eyes on me. I didn't look her way again. In the coming days, I'll be meeting with department heads to discuss specific strategies, I concluded. My door will be open to anyone with insights or concerns. Together, we can restore Meridian to its former strength and beyond. Thank you. There was polite applause, followed by a buzz of conversation as Patricia opened the floor for questions. Most were what you'd expect, concerns about job security, benefits, reporting structures. I answered each one directly without corporate doublespeak. People responded to that honesty. I could see some of the tension in the room begin to ease. No questions came from Alexandra or Marcus. After the meeting, I spent the day in back-to-back sessions with department heads and key team members, getting a ground-level view of Meridian's operations and challenges. By late afternoon, I was in my new office, the CEO's corner suite with its view of the Chicago skyline, reviewing personnel files when my assistant announced that Alexandra Chunreed was asking to see me. I'd known this moment would come. I'd had 3 years to prepare for it. And yet, when she walked through the door, composed but with tension evident in every line of her body, I felt a wave of emotions I thought I'd buried long ago. "David," she said, closing the door behind her. "I think we need to talk." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please sit." She did, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. Up close, I could see the toll the past year had taken. She was still beautiful, still Alexandra, but there was a weariness around her eyes I'd never seen before. "You're the owner of Chun Partners," she said. "Not a question." "Founder and majority shareholder, yes." "How long?" "I started the company about a year after our divorce was finalized." She nodded slowly, processing this. "And no one knew? You've kept this quiet deliberately." "I've focused on results rather than publicity," I said. "It's been more effective that way." A silence stretched between us, filled with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Finally, Alexandra spoke. "I assume you know about Marcus and me. That we're married. That he worked here until recently. I've heard various things. Did you buy Meridian because of me? Because of us?" Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the real question beneath. Is this revenge? "Meridian is a sound investment with strong fundamentals despite its recent troubles," I said, echoing Elaine's assessment. "Chun Partners doesn't make multi-million-dollar acquisitions based on personal vendettas. But you must have known I was here. That this would happen, this conversation, this moment." I looked at her directly. "Yes, I knew you were here. It wasn't a determining factor in the acquisition, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't consider the personal dynamics." She held my gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "The text I sent you yesterday. I didn't know about any of this. About Chun Partners, about the acquisition. I gathered that. I wanted to ask your advice because..." She hesitated, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "Marcus has lost everything. The investments that failed here weren't just client funds. He put everything we had into them as well. The house is being foreclosed on. There are tax issues I'm only now discovering. And with his reputation in tatters, he can't find another position." I kept my expression neutral, though part of me was grimly satisfied to hear that Marcus had fallen victim to his own arrogance and recklessness. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely sincerely. "Financial difficulties are challenging, especially when unexpected." Alexandra gave a short, brittle laugh. "You can say I told you so, David. God knows you'd be entitled." "That wouldn't serve any purpose," I replied. She took a deep breath. "I need to know if I still have a job. If there's a place for me at Meridian under your leadership." And there it was, the reason for her sudden desire to reconnect. Not remorse, not a realization that she'd made a mistake in leaving me, but practical necessity. Alexandra had always been practical. "We're reviewing all positions as part of the restructuring," I said, falling back on corporate language. "No decisions have been made yet about specific roles. David, please." A note of desperation entered her voice. "I'm good at what I do. You know that. Whatever happened between us personally, my professional record here has been exemplary, at least until Marcus's investment strategies implicated your clients as well." I finished for her. "Yes, I've reviewed the reports. You brought in significant business over the years, but recently, several of your top clients have left, following substantial losses." She flinched. "Those investment directives came from above. I raised concerns about the level of risk, but I was overruled. By Marcus, partly, and by the former CEO, who gave Marcus unusual latitude because of his past success." I studied her, trying to determine how much of this was truth and how much was Alexandra rewriting history to save herself. It was a familiar pattern. She had always been skilled at positioning herself advantageously when situations changed. "Your performance will be evaluated like everyone else's," I said finally, "on its merits, past and present. Neither our history nor your connection to Marcus will be factors in that assessment. Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by uncertainty. And what about working together? Can we do that, given everything? I believe I can maintain professional objectivity, I said. The question is whether you can take direction from someone you once deemed insufficiently ambitious. A flush spread across her cheeks. I deserve that, she admitted. The things I said when I left, they were cruel and unfair. I was caught up in what Marcus represented, the lifestyle, the connections, the apparent success. I thought I was trading up. Obviously, I was wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Alexandra. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to hear her admit she'd made a mistake. Now, it felt hollow, coming only after her grand plans had collapsed. We all make choices, I said. Some work out better than others. She nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Did you know about Marcus's financial troubles, about what was happening here at Meridian? Before you decided to acquire the company, we did extensive due diligence," I replied. "We were aware of the general situation, so you knew I was heading for a fall. It wasn't a question this time. You knew everything was crumbling, and you positioned yourself to, what? Save the company? Watch it burn? See me humbled." I leaned forward, suddenly tired of the careful dance we were doing. What I knew, Alexandra, was that a company with good people and solid fundamentals was being mismanaged by leadership that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability. I knew I could help turn it around, give those good people job security and growth opportunities again. Your presence here was a complication, not a motivation. And now, she asked quietly, now that we're here talking like this, what happens next? Now I do my job as CEO. I make decisions based on what's best for the company and its employees. You do your job, if you choose to stay, and we maintain professional boundaries. She stood, smoothing her skirt again in that nervous gesture I remembered from years ago. Thank you for being direct with me. I know you had no obligation to be. As she turned to leave, I found myself asking, what happened with Marcus? After everything fell apart. Alexandra paused at the door, her back to me. He left 3 weeks ago. Said he had opportunities in Los Angeles that would help us rebuild. She glanced back over her shoulder, a sad smile playing at her lips. He hasn't called since. After she left, I sat for a long time, looking out at the darkening Chicago skyline. I thought about the path that had led me here, from the devastated man standing in an empty house to the CEO of a growing private equity firm. I thought about Alexandra, who had once been the center of my world, now struggling with the consequences of her choices. I didn't feel the savage satisfaction I might have expected. There was some vindication. Yes, I had proven myself in ways neither Alexandra nor Marcus had believed possible. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of closure. The wound that had driven me for 3 years was finally healing, not because I had exacted revenge, but because I had built something meaningful from the ashes of that pain. The next morning, my assistant handed me a report. I'd requested a detailed assessment of each department within Meridian, with recommendations for restructuring and personnel decisions. Alexandra's name was highlighted among those in client relations. The recommendation was clear. Despite recent client losses, Alexandra Chen-Reed had a proven track record of building strong client relationships. She had institutional knowledge that would be valuable during the transition. The professional assessment was to retain her, with close supervision as she rebuilt her client portfolio. I stared at the report for a long time before signing my approval. Not because of our history, not because I still harbored feelings for her, but because it was the right business decision. And I had built Chun Partners on making the right decisions, even when they were difficult. That afternoon, I passed Alexandra in the hallway. She was speaking with a potential client, her professional mask firmly in place. She paused momentarily when she saw me, uncertainty flickering across her features. I nodded politely and continued to my next meeting. In the months that followed, Meridian began its slow recovery. We stabilized the client base, implemented new compliance protocols, and gradually restored confidence in the firm. I worked closely with the department heads, including occasionally with Alexandra in her role as Director of Client Relations. She was professional, competent, and kept a respectful distance. I did the same. We never spoke of personal matters again, never mentioned Marcus or our history. To the rest of the staff, we were simply CEO and department director with no indication of our past connection. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I would wonder if things might have been different if she had recognized my potential earlier, if she had been patient enough to build a life with me instead of looking for someone who'd already achieved the success she craved. But those thoughts grew less frequent as I settled into my role at Meridian and continued to expand Chun Partners' portfolio. 6 months after taking over as interim CEO, I appointed Elaine as Meridian's permanent CEO and returned to my primary role at Chun Partners. At the announcement reception, Alexandra approached me, champagne flute in hand. "Congratulations," she said. "The turnaround has been remarkable." "Thank you. The staff deserves most of the credit. They were resilient through a difficult time." She nodded, then added quietly, "I filed for divorce last week. From Marcus. I finally accepted he's not coming back." I wasn't sure why she was telling me this, what response she expected. "I hope that brings you some closure," I said finally. "It has," she replied, "as has watching you these past months. Seeing the kind of leader you've become." She hesitated, then continued, "You were never ordinary, David. I was too blind to see it." With that, she walked away. Disappearing into the crowd of celebrating employees, I didn't follow her. There was nothing more to say, no relationship to rebuild. We had both changed too much, traveled too far from the people we had been when we met in that art gallery a decade ago. The next morning, I was back in my office at Chun Partners, reviewing acquisition proposals for our next venture. The intercom buzzed. My assistant announcing that Elaine was on the line from Meridian. "The transition is going smoothly," she reported. "But there's one personnel matter I wanted to discuss with you directly." "Alexandra?" I guessed. "Yes. She's submitted her resignation, effective in 2 weeks. Says she's received an offer from a firm in Boston." I absorbed this information, surprised to find I felt neither satisfaction nor regret, just acknowledgement of another chapter closing. Did she give any other reason? Only that she felt it was time for a fresh start. I tried to convince her to stay. She's been effective in bringing back some former clients, but she seemed determined. "It's her decision," I said. "Thank her for her contributions to the turnaround and wish her well." After hanging up, I walked to the window of my office, looking out at the city where my greatest failure had ultimately led to my greatest success. I thought about how losing Alexandra had forced me to redefine myself, to discover ambitions I might never have pursued had she stayed. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become catalysts for transformation. Sometimes what seems like an ending is really a beginning. And sometimes, the person who walks away from you does you the greatest favor of your life without ever intending to. Alexandra would never know that her leaving had set me on this path. That in trying to find someone she deemed worthy of her ambition, she had awakened mine. That the man she had dismissed as too ordinary had become someone extraordinary precisely because she had stopped believing in him. And that was fine. My success wasn't about her anymore. It never really had been. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten note from Alexandra, her last communication before leaving for Boston. "David," it read, "I've spent 3 years regretting my choices and these past months seeing exactly what I walked away from. You built something remarkable, not just Chun Partners or the Meridian turnaround, but yourself. I wish I'd had the wisdom to grow with you instead of looking for someone I thought was already complete. Be well." I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer, neither keeping it as a trophy nor destroying it in anger. It was simply an artifact from a chapter of my life that had finally, completely closed. I had work to do, a company to grow, a future to build, one that had become infinitely larger than the dreams Alexandra and I had once shared. And somewhere along the way, proving her wrong had stopped mattering. What mattered was proving myself right.